And we've come up with this adage that if you don't have a youth strategy in solving problems, then you really don't have a strategy at all. And we're sharing that with corporations, we're sharing it with political leaders, we're sharing it with funders across the United States. And we're getting a remarkably positive response to it. People get it when you explain it to them. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer. One of the things that we've done, though, is to try to put this in a context so that people really understand exactly what our kids doing. I was telling somebody the story that when I was in South Africa and I met with the Minister of Service there, and their focus is on kids, they call them youth, between 15 and 40. I know that makes some people in the room happy. And so we go 5 to 25 in the United States, and so he's looking at me kind of puzzled, and he looks over at me and he goes, what's this 5 to 25? He said, what can a 5-year-old do? What can a 10-year-old do? And a half an hour later, I think he regretted asking me the question because I was going on and on and on. But I think, this what young people are doing, we've now created a new model at YSA that I encourage you to take a look at as well. And hopefully it will help you explain what young people in your communities are doing. And we're calling it Youth ASAP. And it's not just ASAP. Everybody around the world knows that means as soon as possible. What Dr. King called the fierce urgency of now. And that goes back to that other period of where we have the integration of the youth bubble with the big challenges and the unique capabilities. But what we're also seeing is the 4 areas in which we're seeing young people primarily at work. The first one is awareness. And young people are powerful, powerful forces in terms of raising awareness. We funded a project this year of 6-year-olds in Turkey. And these kids, they dressed them up as water droplets. And they did, everyone know what a flash mob is? So they did flash mobs all over their community in Ankara. And these kids, 6 years old, dressed as water droplets, well, the kids had studied water scarcity. They knew a lot more about it than the adults did because it wasn't a problem 20 years ago, 30 years ago in Turkey. But these kids became experts on water scarcity, water quality, water conservation. They created these information cards, and they did these flash mobs in front of government buildings and shopping centers and town squares. And of course, everybody would gather around like, what are these little 6-year-olds dressed up as water droplets? And they did their kind of cool water dance and their water songs. And the adults are like, what is this? And then the kids would then go into the crowd and give out information on water conservation and water scarcity, water and sanitation. So it was young children educating adults about a critical issue facing Turkey. So that awareness issue is key. The service, the S in the ASAP, is really that direct intervention. That's when the kid cleans up the beach. That's when they collect books for a homeless shelter, when they do a canned food drive, where they're directly intervening in a literacy program. But it's sort of the blood, sweat, and tears of the ASAP. The second A is advocacy. We funded a program in Vermont this year where the students partnered, middle school students partnered with their state legislature. And there is now a new law, thanks to this project, there is now a new law where it is illegal to smoke in cars if there are children in the car. And the kids learned that, there are 42 poisons in cigarette smoke, and why do I have to, where the windows are rolled up and kids have to suck in that secondhand smoke from their parents or from an adult, that is now illegal in Vermont, thanks to this GYSD project. So the advocacy piece, where kids are changing policies, changing laws, fundamentally affecting issues that affect them. And of course, the last one, philanthropy. I love the Harris Wofford awardee that we gave this year. I think he's built now 3 schools in Kenya. He's 17. 17 years old, has already built 3 schools. And he's raised the money. The great program that I love, Fund a Field, that'll be featured next week on Nickelodeon, Kyle Weiss. He's now built 8 soccer fields in Africa, raised the money for it. He's raised $100,000. He's on a second $100,000. Fund a Field. He's 17. I said, well, I go to Africa a lot. And he goes, really? How many times have you been there, Steve? And I said, 12. He said, well, I've been there 8, and I'm only 17. I said, is this like a competition? Clearly it is. So, the ASAP, I think, will help us all understand and be able to explain what young people are doing. We're going to keep working on this. We're going to come up with all kinds of cool case studies in each one of these: awareness, service, advocacy, and philanthropy, on where young people are affecting the world. So again, what's blocking our success? I don't have to explain this to you. You know it. It's adult prejudices, it's tradition, it's ageism, it's low expectations, unwillingness to share decision-making power, and just plain old-fashioned, view of youth as recipients or victims or dependents or problems. And that's what we have to get through. We know who solves the world's problems. It is not governments, it's not corporations, it's not congregations, it's not NGOs, it's not media. It's us. It's we the people. That's why those are the three words when they wrote the Constitution a few blocks from here. We the people of the United States in order to form a more perfect union. It's we the people that solve problems. And we know that if you do this as a kid, it is the only indicator that you'll do it for the rest of your life. And not only will you serve the rest of your life, but you'll also write checks. That $300+ billion, that's with a B, that was given away to charity last year, the vast majority of it came from volunteers, and the vast majority of those volunteers started as children. So this is a critical pipeline. For those of you from Texas, you know that word pipeline. It's a critical pipeline to lifelong service and lifelong volunteering. So here we are 25 years after our founding. 25 years. Kind of cool. We're psyched. Young people are volunteering at record rates today, more than any generation in history. We're pretty fired up about that. But what does that mean to an organization like YSA? And what's the next 25 years? Well, we know that this is now a global movement. We're now in 102 countries this year on 6 continents doing this work. That's pretty cool. In the last year, we've been in Egypt, we've been in Israel, we've been in Singapore, we've been in Russia, Argentina, Lesotho, Swaziland, South Africa, Colombia. These are YSA staffers actually on the ground in these places. And that's a powerful message that this isn't anymore, when I talked about, problems not having passports and young people being citizens of the world, this is the movement that we're leading. And we need to connect kids in Kansas with kids in Cameroon because they're both dealing with water scarcity. As I said to the kids in Lesotho and Swaziland, we actually have in Washington, D.C., an HIV/AIDS rate that is comparable to yours in sub-Saharan Africa. In Washington, D.C., the capital of the richest country in the world, we've got an HIV rate comparable to Southern Africa. It's a disgrace. But these are common ground. This is common ground that young people can work on these issues together. So this global movement is clearly where we are expanding and connecting young people in America with young people around the world. Hi, Mary. It's great to see you. But we know this logo doesn't work anymore. Remember this logo? Anybody seen that one before? Kind of red, white, and blue, lots of stars and stripes. So we kind of said to ourselves, actually some of our partners overseas said, really? You want to work in our country with that logo? So we're going through a little bit of a brand identification and a rebranding. And we've come up with a new brand that will really move us. And everybody calls us YSA anyway. It's our URL, which really helps. We've been ysa.org since 1996. So eventually that Youth Service America under the YSA will go away. The Youth Changing the World tagline will stay. But ultimately, what we're seeing is this is our new logo. And you'll see this. And I took this to Russia this summer, working on the Olympics. It's kind of amazing, and the response has been great. You can see some of the ways that we're doing it at the bottom, YSA there, where it's all the flags of the world, again, the same shape. You can see what it looks like on T-shirts and on posters, and it'll come in all different kinds of colors. The one, you can't see it all that well, but the smaller YSA there is photographs, just taken from you guys that we've actually put into the logo. So you'll see lots of those kinds of changes in our rebranding as we increasingly are perceived to be a global NGO. Our mission stays the same, and that's what we're really going to talk about today and the outcomes. We still are obsessed with communities. This can't be about just engaging kids. That can't be our end-all be-all. There has to be a greater purpose, because kids will sniff that out. If they're not fundamentally and authentically changing communities, it's not going to work. But we need to do it by increasing the number, that big scale issue, and the diversity. How do we make sure kind of all God's children have this opportunity? We're going to stick with the ages of 5 to 25, even though in Africa it does go up to 40, and that's great. We'll take, I'll go as high and as old as you want, as long as you'll go as young as I want. Although I had a mom the other day, she said, well, 5, that's too late. You've already lost them. And I said, that's because you're Jewish and, it happens in the womb. So, but the point is that I can't really get to kids before 5. So, and then obviously substantive roles. I don't want kids just cleaning up a park unless they're trying to figure out why the park got dirty in the first place. This is not about slave labor. This is about understanding fundamental issues, how our society works, and how we solve problems. So let me bring up 2 of my board members. Kathy Payne from State Farm. I think, I have to make a plug for State Farm here. Kathy has been our partner in crime. We're celebrating 10 years of State Farm being YSA's premier funder. And Kathy, you have literally changed the world. And, from our conversation, 11 years ago, she didn't call me for 3 months after we spoke, and I thought, how could I get over that? How could I have gotten this so wrong? I wasn't wrong. But it was an amazing, amazing partnership. And remains an amazing, amazing partnership. State Farm, as you know, insures 1 out of every 4 cars that drives by. They have more outlets than McDonald's. It is a remarkable, remarkable company run by remarkable people. And Ed Rust, who is the education CEO in this country, needs to be cloned across every chamber of commerce in America. He is a remarkable human being and leads a great company, and I think we're all privileged to work with him. The gentleman in the middle is Mr. University of Pennsylvania, one of the great Ivy League schools located very close to where we're standing today. Ira Harkavy's been on the YSA board for almost 10 years, and he has been running this amazing, amazing center at Penn called the Netter Center. And the Netter Center is absolutely, I'm going to ask him to talk a little bit about this, is absolutely the premier model for community and university engagement in the world. I mean, they've got global, he'll tell you what happened this morning, but it is a global model, and I am privileged to have both of these 2 people, Ira Harkavy and Kathy Payne, on my board. So, before we talk about the outcomes and the outcomes that we're looking at, and I think all of you are hearing from your funders about, what's the outcome? I know the number of kids, but what are really the outcomes? It's not just the output, it's the outcomes. But before we do that, Kathy, I'm going to ask you, tell us what's going on at State Farm. What's the latest and greatest? And I think we've got some magnets on the table that may be a little bit of an indication of some of the things you're doing.
Well, thanks, and congratulations on 25 years. And I'm going to keep this short because I know we've got some time constraints. But State Farm continues to value both service learning and youth engagement in a very powerful way. I'm going to call out, we have 2 of our State Farm Youth Advisory Board members that are part of YSA's Youth Council. Alex Worth and Sean Russell are both here, so if you haven't met them, please do so. We're proud of our Youth Advisory Board. Service learning to us is the only way to go. First and foremost, if we are going to do all of the things that we need to be doing in communities, not having young people at the same table as the rest of us is just absolutely wrong. And so as we continue in our efforts in education, it's focused around systemic improvement. We're very focused on how do we take this system of education that we have in this country that's a 100-year-old model and reshape it into a model that works for all of our kids. And when I say all of our kids, I mean all of our kids. So as we look at the reauthorization of ESEA that's on the table right now, we in the business community and State Farm are going to be pushing really hard to not walk backwards from the all kids provision. We know that ESEA has to be changed. We know it has to be reformed. We know that the way in which it was implemented is not right exactly, but all kids means all kids. So we're going to fight very hard for that. We're going to continue to support young people in authentic roles. People like me need to learn how to step back and be quiet and let young people lead. I think we demonstrate that with our Youth Advisory Board. We'll continue to do that. And then the third pillar for us is teacher quality. We believe very, very strongly that the main driver of student achievement is the teacher in the classroom. And we as communities have to figure out better ways to take things off of their plates, allow them to do what they need to do. We need to pay teachers more. We need to find, yeah, absolutely, hands down. And we need to allow teachers to think differently about how they work with young people and figure out that partnership that's so important. So the other thing, and I don't want to forget this, if you've not yet discovered our 26-second campaign, which you'll see a magnet on your table, we're very focused around the dropout issue. Every 26 seconds, a young person in this country drops out of high school. We have an abysmal graduation rate for a country with our resources, and we have a campaign that is all focused around young people. It's young people themselves helping figure out how do we get our arms around this issue. So we have a Facebook page, 26seconds.com site for young people. Please go on the site, figure out how you can be a force. There are incentives for young people and for adults and for organizations, but most importantly, young people need to help us turn this horrible statistic around.
Thanks, Kathy. Ira, what's going on?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for inviting me here today, and also thank YSA for its extraordinary work. I've been 10 years of a board member, but as Steve knows, I've had a long history with YSA through Harris Wofford, who's had an enormous influence on YSA and my own work personally, and the growth and development has been extraordinary. So let me just summarize a key principle. Can't change schooling K to 12, pre-K to 12, unless you change schooling pre-K 20 plus. It's the whole schooling system, and higher education plays an enormous role in shaping how we learn and how we think and how schools function. Higher education is also an institution that's rooted in communities all over the country. And too much of higher education historically, certainly since 1920 to about 1990, had been divorced from those neighborhoods. Our work is about connecting university students and faculty and staff to the real lived conditions of their environments. In our case, West Philadelphia, a poor, disadvantaged community in which Penn, one of the richest universities in the world, sits. And in fact, unless Penn is deeply engaged in that work of helping to solve the problems in that neighborhood with the community through activities, particularly service learning related activities, then Penn is not fulfilling its mission. It's not doing what it's designed to do institutionally. And our work has been devoted to working in our neighborhoods through an approach of service learning that's problem solving, pre-K through 20 plus, developing health centers, nutrition projects, new ways of reading and learning as a way to improve those neighbors and Penn. And we do it through schools largely, not exclusively, work with communities of faith, community organizations, but schools as hubs of neighborhoods, open extended hours, open 24 hours a day if possible, 7 days a week, with a curriculum that's focused on learning through changing the world for everybody, not just for the high school students, middle school, elementary, and students at each level teaching one another. And there is now, as Steve indicated, a global movement. Our work is being replicated around the United States. We have regional centers that have been set up. But I just left a meeting this morning with people from India, from the Fulbright Commission, and they're there for the reason of learning about how universities and schools can partner and build service into, not just build it into the core, but make it the core. How it could be the purpose of the institutions itself to advance learning, to advance human welfare, and starting right in your locality. So that's the work we've been involved with, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
You know, Ira, I had dinner with the dean of University of Nebraska at Omaha, and she said, you know, every one of our students does service learning. I said, how is that possible? How is that possible? And why is it possible? And she said, it's really easy. It's our mission. The University of Nebraska at Omaha's mission is to make Omaha a better place. And when they do that, it actually creates better students. And we're seeing this across the board at universities. How do we make that jump in terms of scale, which is our first item on there, engaging 3.7 million children and youth in 5,000 communities worldwide? How do we take what you guys know at the university level and bring it into high schools and middle schools and elementary schools?
Well, it has to be built into all institutions. So higher education might know it, but it doesn't yet do it. And the core question is what you're doing now widely, is working to build this into the curriculum and showing in terms of scalability that it results in what we're also going to talk about, better learning, better citizenship, and better communities in society. Those issues, that this is not done to be just good, it's to be done to do good, do well, and do better. And it's that argument and bring it into the core of the curriculum into learning at all levels of schooling, which is absolutely key.
And teachers say, Kathy, when we talk to them, well, I don't have time to do service learning on top of everything else that we do. What do we say to that?
I think the challenge is that communities have to come back to schools. We're asking teachers, I mean, any teacher that's sitting here knows this, we're asking teachers to do everything that communities used to have on their plates. We're asking teachers to feed 3 meals a day, we're asking them to be guardians, we're parents, counselors, we're asking them to, get all kids up to the same level of achievement, even if their child walks in their classroom reading 2 years behind. We as communities have to come back and take that off teachers' plates first and foremost, take that off the schoolhouse door and take it back into community. So we have to do that. Secondly, service learning is not something extra you do, it's a way by which you do what you're already doing. But you have to think differently about the relationship between being a teacher and a student. And I'm a former teacher. I look back on relative horror to my teaching years and what I did to children because, to be honest, I taught the way I was taught to teach, which was I was the authority figure. I stood in front of the classroom. I threw out information. They hoped that they got it or, whatever. And I didn't consider them to be a partner with me, which was absolutely abysmally wrong. I think back about if I had instead looked at my kids and said, okay, this is what we need to learn today. We need to learn that 2 + 2 = 4. And so what's the best way to do that? How are we going to do that together and let them be part of that process? First and foremost, I would have been a better teacher. I know all of my kids would have learned better. We would have all been more engaged. So we've got to change the way we look at that relationship between teachers and students as partnerships. But in order to do that, we have to have systems of education that are flexible and allow teachers to do that, and communities have to take something off of a teacher's plate.
Ira, when you think about, we've got this movement very strong in higher ed. We've got it certainly strong in the independent schools and the parochial schools, almost the Exeter and the Andovers of the world, the Friends School, Germantown Academy, all these. Service learning is a fundamental part. But these are all elitist education models. When you're at Penn, one of the great universities, an Ivy League school, and you're working in West Philadelphia, how do you make sure that diversity, advancing the youth who are traditionally not asked to serve, how do you keep from serving those kids and instead getting them to serve?
That's a great question. I think there are 3 parts of that. The first issue is that it relates to Kathy's point, which I'm going to slightly amend. You take other groups in the community all have to contribute, but they can contribute at the schoolhouse.
Absolutely.
And the reason I say that and why that's important is you bring partners into the school where you learn in sight. You learn together. And you give the responsibility of service and the opportunity to every member of that school community. To the teachers, to the students, to the university students, and you work together to solve the problems. On the issue of diversity and how to bring this about, it's the third focus is the argument that this is part of core education for every child in every school. And in the work that we do, if we're providing a service, let's say a garden in the school, where they grow fruits and vegetables and sell it, it's linked to the middle school children's curriculum. And the high school student mentors the middle school student. So one creates peer-assisted learning and mentoring from, you can start at either level, from elementary school, pre-elementary school, all the way through higher education.
The one question that we get from a lot of funders is, what is the impact on these kids? Are we really seeing student achievement? Are we really seeing, what corporations are looking for in terms of the workplace readiness skills, communication skills? Are they able to work as a team? Are they able to have that responsibility to show up on time? Where are the workplace readiness skills? And of course, we sit there in the service. You can't do an effective service learning project unless you've got teamwork, unless you've got leadership skills, all of our projects, that we're all involved with at these tables today, we all look and we know that young people are at the center of them. So we are teaching those leadership skills. And then in the student achievement piece, when we look at why kids drop out, they're bored, they're unengaged, they have no hope. School doesn't give them any hope because they've never actually solved a problem in their life. All they see are problems coming at them at 40 miles an hour in every way, shape, or form. So what do we say about this impact on youth, this increasing student achievement, this workplace readiness? Do we really, how important is that, Kathy?
Well, it's critically important. How many of you would take your 16-year-old, put them behind a wheel of a car if they'd never and turn them loose on the freeway if they've never practiced driving? Okay, but yet we want young people to lead. We want them to give back to their communities, but we're not giving them the opportunity to do so. So if, in fact, we believe, as I think we do, that, again, at some point, young people are going to grow up and become adults, that we want them to be the kind of citizens that we all need, then we have to give them opportunities to demonstrate that early with the supports necessary to do so. So I think that's one piece of it. The academic achievement piece is hugely important. As a nation, you all are aware of the fact that we're falling behind the rest of the world. And I know people get tired of hearing that, and sometimes we in this country have blinders on and just don't want to see what's in front of us. But the world has changed. I didn't have to compete for my first job with young people from India and China. Our children today will. Therefore, we have to prepare our kids to be competitive, and they're not going to be competitive unless they're achieving at the same level as their international peers. So to do that, we simply have to think differently about how we engage young people. Our minority children are now going to very soon be the majority. They tend to be the children that we are currently underserving if you look at numbers. So we have to figure out a way in which we engage young people, we get them involved so that their academic achievement will soar, so that they can be competitive, so they can be ready for the world of work, because ideally that's where all of our children are headed.
Ira, I know you've got a high unemployment rate in Philadelphia. I heard a statistic this weekend at our Campfire board meeting that said we actually wouldn't have an unemployment problem in America if we had people trained for the existing jobs. The jobs are out there. We just don't have people who are trained to do them. 3
million jobs in this country are unfilled right now.
Imagine what that would do to that 9.1% rate. And they're in things like clean energy. They're in things like rethinking the manufacturing process. So obviously you're both a training ground and a practice ground. How are you looking at the unemployment rate, and how are you trying to intersect with that through the Netter Center?
And I'm going to be very apologetic, but I teach for a living, so I got to run and meet my students soon. So this is going to be my last answer, and I apologize.
It's all right.
I really have to get back to the campus.
It's been great to have you.
Right, but let me just indicate that issue of employment in general. There are two parts to that. The first issue is employment is a central issue, so people are prepared to work. But to have that, they also need the motivation. And one of the great powers of this work is it motivates ongoing learning. John Dewey wrote the idea of what is learning really supposed to be, and he said it requires a motive in back and an object in front. A motive, but linked to changing something. So one of the crucial issues why we don't have prepared young people is they're not prepared for learning in the world, which is part of employment. The second issue of employment and connections, I have a very distinguished board. Incredibly distinguished board at the Netter Center, almost as distinguished as YSA. Very distinguished board. And that board said to me, I asked them, what's the most makes you feel you were relatively successful? Law, business, medicine, entertainment, all, and they looked at, and we asked them individually, collaborative, real-world problem solving. The ability to work with other human beings to make a difference, to solve problems. The way that gets taught for employment and for life is by having young people actually work to solve real problems in the world. And I thank all of you, but I really have to run. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And that's a great way to close this, because I think, when I started it as the CEO of YSA 15 years ago, and Sylvia and Karen, who've been there on much of that journey with me, we were really hesitant to tell young people what to care about. If my grandmother died of breast cancer and your grandmother died of heart disease and your great-grandfather died of leukemia, we're all going to look at the world in a different place from our own personal perspective about things that have happened in our community. And yet we know that there are really critical frameworks out there. There's the Millennium Development Goals. We know in our work in Brazil, 85% of the projects that take place in Brazil by the kids on Global Youth Service Day are connected to one of the Millennium Development Goals. The kids identify that. In Africa, they'll tell you what the MDGs are. They can enumerate them. I suspect most Americans would be clueless. We could certainly come together and figure out what those problems are and figure them out ultimately. But I would say most Americans would probably not be able to enumerate those. But that is a framework. And when we talk about this now, I mean, if you look at YSA's portfolio, we're now looking at childhood obesity. Again, if you don't have a youth strategy, you don't have a strategy at all. We now have a 50-state strategy on solving the childhood obesity problem by turning it over to kids themselves to solve. It's affecting them more than anyone else. If they don't understand the issue and they're not taking action on it, how the heck do we think we're going to create change? Adults telling them what to do, again, treating them like recipients? That clearly hasn't worked since 1980, when it's gone from 4% of our community to 20%. So with State Farm, we're now going to start a whole new effort on teen driver safety. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, obviously, teen driver safety is critically important to all of us. It's still the leading cause of death in young people. So it's not just because we're an insurance company, it's because we're community citizens that we care about this. And I'm going to kind of give an anecdotal story that kind of ties this all together. When we started our State Farm Youth Advisory Board, and if you're not familiar with it, it's something we're very proud of as a company. It's 30 young people, ages 17 to 20. We give them $5 million that they have full authority over granting to youth-led service learning projects around the country. And when I pulled the first board together in 2006, and it was, again, 30 young people who'd never met each other from all over the United States, 2 representatives from Canada, and pulled them into a room and, talked to them a little bit, and then said, here's what, at the end of the day, we'd like, which is a board. You're going to need to create bylaws. You're going to need to decide what issues you think are important to you. You're going to have to figure out how you're going to work, and turned them loose. And they looked at me with a little bit of skepticism, because they kind of thought they were coming to a meeting where we were going to tell them what to do. And they created everything. And they picked the issues that were important to them, teen driver safety being one of those. And as every board since then has gotten together, they have taken the issues, which have remained pretty consistent, but they've added something to it. They took a topic that was natural disasters and changed it to natural and societal disasters, because bullying was such a huge issue that they were seeing, and they wanted to find a way to address that. So to this day, the young people that are part of this board, and I can say this with immense pride, have changed our organization internally. The first board meeting, I had a ton of executives that were sitting around the room watching these 30 young people who we were going to give $5 million to, and they were going to watch them work. And they came back from having created the board, and they said, can we take over? And I said, you sure can. And I watched them go through. I mean, these are people that have very different views on different things. We've got everything from very liberal Democrats to very conservative Republicans, from small rural communities to urban settings. I mean, across the board, they represent diversity in every definition of the word. And yet, they can sit there and respectfully debate an issue back and forth and come to a conclusion where they're going to compromise, which is a word we're not hearing much lately, by the way, where they can compromise and come to a solution. And the key to it is they want to move. It's action. How are we going to make this happen? Let's go. And as our executives sat around and watched them work, most of them turned to me and said, why can't we run a meeting like this? To which point I said, why can't we? So as we look at whether it's teen driver safety, which we're really excited about, we're going to be launching a signature program at State Farm around that, and we've got a great program called Project Ignition that we work on, and YSA is going to kick in and help us with some curriculum around teen driver safety. But the key to this, in my opinion, is everything that all of you are about. It's whether or not we are willing, as adults in this society, to let young people have an active voice in what we do. I personally don't think we've done a great job. No offense to my generation, but I'm looking at the world right now and thinking, wow, there are certainly some things we could have done differently. I'm looking at how Congress is working right now and not feeling a tremendous sense of pride in our political process. I don't personally think that young people could do much worse. So I'm willing to step back and let the young people that I see in this room and that you're all associated with help us get to a better state, which, by the way, happens to be a State Farm slogan, so isn't that great? But the bottom line is, I would love for all of us to figure out a way to go back to our communities, to talk to the adults in our circle, whether it's educators or legislators or community leaders or our friends or our family, and get comfortable with the fact that the young people of today are smart. They know the world, and more importantly, they're going to be our leaders moving forward. It's time for us to give them that opportunity to practice that in a meaningful way. I'm willing to stand side by side with them, but every single youth board meeting that I go through, or every single time I'm with a bunch of young people, I learn far more than they learn from me. So I think it's time for us as adults to really walk the talk and figure out a way to get young people involved in these key issues that we need to solve. We've got so many issues on the table. I don't think we're going to be able to solve them all by ourselves. It's time.
Amen. And I think where you're going to see us increasingly go in the next 25 years is bringing these issues like water. I mean, I think, we're already fighting wars over water. Water scarcity. I mean, we're seeing enormous droughts. If you're from Oklahoma or Texas, you know what I'm talking about. And we've got young people in this country have got to become experts on water as youth, so that they can take this knowledge and solve this problem. And somebody mentioned this to me the other day, and I really had forgotten it. All the water that we have on the planet right now is all the water we're ever going to have. The same amount that when we had 1 billion people, they had the same amount of water as we're going to have when we become a 9 billion population planet. So we've got to figure that issue out. We've got to figure out this whole issue of climate change, and how do we get young people to own this big issue? We're talking to a foundation right now, and again, these are going to be all grants, dollars going into your organizations and your kids solving these. We're talking to a foundation right now that just informed us that 1 out of 5 teenagers has a hearing loss problem from these personal listening devices as teenagers. Now I look at Harris Wofford, he's going to be 86 next year, and he's finally putting in hearing aids. Thank God. But we've got teenagers that are going to need hearing aids. And we've got to figure out how to get young people to own this problem because it's happening to them. So this is what we're going to be looking for, the whole new movement on childhood hunger. 1 out of 5 kids goes to bed hungry in the United States of America. How do we get kids to own this issue? Pascal Brady, are you here somewhere? Pascal is here from the Sodexo Foundation. Sodexo came to us and said, we want to turn over this problem. We are obsessed with stopping hunger, and we want to turn over this problem to young people themselves because it's affecting young people more than anyone else. So I welcome you to partner with us on some of these big critical issues that are facing the planet. We're excited about this new partnership 10 years into it, where we're going to be doing a lot more around teen driver safety with State Farm. But there's going to be a whole plethora of issues in health, in education, in human service, and in human rights and the environment. And by the way, all these things are connected. Water, deeply connected to girls' rights and education, deeply connected to waterborne diseases, which are the biggest killer of children in the world. So we've got lots of dots to connect, and it's really important that kids learn this and understand this if they're going to be the effective change makers that we need them to be, not want them to be, if we need them to be. And I cannot think of a more important thing for all of us to be doing than this kind of work. So Kathy, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.